Airta.
The battle between Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg for F1 supremacy had lasted 3 seasons. During this time, there had been many very good races that feature numerous battles on the track between the two drivers. But the one that stands out, without a doubt, is the 2014 Bahrain Grand Prix. At a time where the F1 universe was wondering if it was about to witness another heavy domination by one team, the Mercedes drivers showed that they were able to fight and were given the freedom to do it by their team. This, so long as they did not put each other out of races. The 2014 Bahrain Grand Prix was the site of an intense battle between two very determined drivers. The fact that this occurred before the tensions would rise between Hamilton and Rosberg only added to the drama. They fought hard and cleanly. This is why the 2014 Bahrain Grand Prix is a race to remember. 2014 was a time of big changes for Formula One. That year, the sports introduced a new engine with an energy recovering system. This was an essential part of a new regulation, willing to demonstrate that the upper echelon of motor racing was willing to do significantly more to be efficient, notably by recovering a portion of the heat emanating from the car and transforming it into horsepower. This energy would now be harnessed and used to power the engine. That new system would be incorporated in the newly designed 1.6-liter turbocharged V6 engine. The arrival of this new engine was a game changer for the F1 Championship, as it signified that the sport was entering a new era. The Mercedes engine was so formidable that it changed the entire perspective of the championship, and with it, the Mercedes team would dominate the show. Behind the wheel of the German cars were one-time world champion British driver Lewis Hamilton and one-time race winner German driver Nico Rosberg. The 2014 Bahrain Grand Prix was the place where it became evident that the German team would own the season. After a Rosberg opening win in Australia, Hamilton went on to win the race in Malaysia. 2 victories in 2 races meant that everybody would fear that Mercedes was in the process of dominating the circuit for the season, in the same manner that Red Bull had annihilated everybody to end the 2013 season. But Mercedes was aware of the F1 universe fears and was willing to take the risk that came with letting its drivers race freely. In hindsight, 2014 was the opening year of the Lewis Hamilton era. He would go on to win 6 championships in 7 years. The only time he would be beaten was by Rosberg 2 years later. That season, the German realized how far he had to go to defeat his teammate, that he decided not to try it again. The period between 2014 and 2016 will be long remembered as one of the few times where 2 teammates, relatively equal in terms of talents, were allowed to fight each other for the Drivers' Championship. Since 2000, F1 fans have rarely been witness to such an arrangement. Hamilton would prevail, but Rosberg was able to give him a solid fight to the end. He pushed the conclusion of the championship at the last race in 2014 before winning it outright in 2016. Along the way, Hamilton and Rosberg were unable to keep their friendship intact. The good intentions at the start of 2014 would rapidly disappear to a more acrimonious atmosphere between the 2 top drivers. From then on, most of their battle on the track would be surrounded by dark clouds. This is what happens when 2 people are willing to do whatever it takes to reach their goal, the Driver Championship. If there was a race where the 2 Mercedes drivers had fought really hard on track and where the fight was as clean as it could be, it was in Bahrain in 2014. The Bahrain Grand Prix was at the infancy of the Mercedes domination, so everything was still fresh. At that time, both drivers still believed that things could work out well within the team. The 2014 Bahrain Grand Prix was probably the theater for the prettiest and funniest battle between Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg. It is there that the F1 universe and Mercedes took notice of what was in store for them. In 2014, Bahrain yielded to the siren's call on the race runs for the first time at night under the lights. F1 had fallen in love with what Singapore had done since 2008, and organizing night Grand Prix events was a thing of great interest in that era. The race would start at 6 p.m. local time and would run after sunset. The novelty being that running this Grand Prix at night could have a significant impact on the race, because it's warmer at the later chosen hour for the start than when the race normally commences during the day. This could have an effect on the tires. Running at night would reduce the options between the different types of rubber the teams could utilize. The hard tires, known as the Prime, average 2 seconds slower speed times than the medium or soft ones. But at night, this disadvantage is significantly reduced. The gap of 2 seconds under the sun is way less under the lights during the evening schedule. Adding to the mystique, this race in Bahrain would be the 900th Grand Prix in Formula One history. At first, in free practice, Hamilton seemingly had an advantage on his teammate, but as the weekend progressed, the more Rosberg was able to catch on and narrow the gap. At the conclusion of the qualifying session, the German was on provisional pole by 0.3 of a second. Hamilton missed his last lap and conceded, "I braked a little bit later and I just locked up." Rosberg would start on pole. However, Hamilton was right with him on the first row. At the start, Rosberg looked the fastest, but that would be only for a millisecond. Instead of going straight up, the German feared that his teammate would try to go directly in front of him, full well knowing that if Hamilton had a good start and went straight ahead, that the British driver would have the lead at the first corner. The problem with this strategy is that if Rosberg was unable to block Hamilton, there was a good chance he would have to give up first place. Rosberg had a good start, but he needed a slightly better one to block Hamilton, who himself got off to a very good start. Once Rosberg committed himself and once he understood that he was going to fail in his attempt to block Hamilton, he realized that he was doomed. When both cars reached turn 1, the British driver had the advantage. Rosberg, now in second, had no intention of letting Hamilton take off in front of him unchallenged. He would try very hard to take back first place during the opening moments of the race. On turn 4, a corner that has a kind of elbow shape, midpoint between a hairpin and a 90-degree corner, Rosberg leapt towards the outside in an attempt to try and surprise Hamilton. Both cars were now side by side when they went through the corner, but Hamilton had no intention of giving up on his advantage so early in the race. At the exit of the corner, he went as wide as he possibly could, finding a way to do it without leaving the racing line. In doing so, he forced Rosberg to make a choice: continue and go off the track, or lift his foot and let Hamilton maintain first place. Being reasonable, Rosberg knows that it's too early and too dangerous to bet everything right there. He chooses the safer path. But he does it at the very last second, and he is actually partially pushed off the track despite his best efforts. The fact that this happened at a spot where there is asphalt off the limit of the track helped Rosberg keep his rhythm, although he was forced to let Hamilton stay in front and in the lead. The battle for first place only begins. With these maneuvers, Hamilton was able to stay in front through the rest of the lap, with Rosberg 1 second behind. For the rest of the field, it is as though they did not even exist. Sure, Felipe Massa with Williams had a tremendous start to take third place, where he ran in front of Sergio Perez on Force India and Valtteri Bottas on the other Williams car. But it already feels like the race is being disputed only between the two Mercedes drivers. As for the others, well, they can fight for what's left. It was really important for Hamilton to take the lead at the start of this race. In the back of his mind, he felt like he did not have the same pace as his teammate, and in order to beat him, he would have to work even harder to find the recipe for victory. In that way, being in the lead to open the race allowed Hamilton to slow Rosberg, at least for the first portion of the Bahrain Grand Prix. There's also the fact that Mercedes had decided before the race that the driver who would be the first on the track would be the first to stop for a tire change in the pits. That would be on lap 19. Both drivers understood the benefits that came with that advantageous change. The leader would run on the soft tires, with the other driver having to rely on the harder compound. Those are nowhere near as favorable once the sun sets and the heat significantly falls off. At the end of the second lap, the gap between Hamilton and Rosberg remained the same at 1 second. In terms of the rest of the drivers' pack, the others' distance times behind the leaders had increased. Massa was now 2.3 seconds behind the leader. For the next set of laps, the situation at the front of the race remained stable. Being out of the DRS zone, Rosberg settled to keep his car in prime shape for the duration of the race, knowing full well that being behind Hamilton, he would have to run the middle stint of the race on medium tires. That will allow him to finish the race on soft tires, in contrast to Hamilton, who would finish the battle on hard ones. Rosberg, following being beaten at the start, understands that his best chance to win would reside in overtaking Hamilton in the last laps of the race, even if it is not his preference. But to be strong at the end means that he had to play it safe for now. He asked his engineer as early as lap 3 for a comparison in fuel consumption with Hamilton. Rosberg was already working in the early stages on a race plan by building on any angle he could find to fight Hamilton for the win, envisioning where the race would be near the finish line. He didn't know it, but at that time, the British driver in front of him was pushing hard, harder than he would like, using his tires more than expected. Rosberg's best occasion to push ahead and land in front might be closer than one would think. But for now, the Mercedes continue to run together at a pace that no one else is able to match. By lap 11, Massa has now fallen 12.5 seconds behind Hamilton. At this point, the Brazilian has other things on his mind than catching the leader. Perez is closer and closer to him, and on lap 12, the Mexican surprises him to take third place. To do it, Perez gives Massa the impression that he will go outside at turn 4, similar to what Rosberg did in the first lap. But Perez applies his brakes to stay behind the Williams and places his car in position to take the lead at the following sequence of corners, which are corners 5, 6, and 7. The way Perez overtook Massa would later be copied by Hamilton in his fight for the lead with Rosberg, but Massa has no intention of letting himself get beaten in that manner. He tried hard to retake what he considered his place, afterwards late braking twice in the corners but remaining unable to overtake Perez. The Force India driver is now firmly in third place. In front, the race takes a different outlook for Rosberg when he is able to close the gap with Hamilton on lap 18. Could it be possible that maybe, just maybe, he could, after all is settled, be in the lead just in time for the first pit stop? Rosberg decided that this was definitely worth a try. It was there in the following seconds that both he and Hamilton would probably have their best duel. Rosberg placed himself in position to benefit from the DRS, which he does while going into turn 1. He then tried to surprise his teammate at that juncture by going on the inside, but he had to brake too late and Hamilton was able to keep the racing line. The British driver stayed first by blocking Rosberg before turns 2 and 3, but that allowed Rosberg to benefit from the tow on his way towards the next corner, turn 4. Rosberg gave it a look, but at that point, he was too far off the leader. He put it off for later in the race. For the remainder of this lap, Rosberg continued to follow Hamilton closely. As both cars headed into the straight leading into turn 1 to begin lap 19, we see Rosberg benefiting from the DRS again. He would undoubtedly try the same maneuver as he did the lap before on Hamilton. But there's no element of surprise, and Hamilton sees it coming. The British driver tries to block the line of Rosberg towards the apex before returning to a more conventional racing line by going on the outside of the corner as he is about to brake. This should have allowed him to exit the corner in a way better position than his rival. But Rosberg saw a way out and attempted to go further on the inside. It was a risky maneuver, both drivers needing to brake extremely late, needing to press down hard on the brake pedal in order to take that corner. They waited so long to make the maneuver that a lot of smoke would emanate from both cars' tires. All this leaving Hamilton back into the racing line, while Rosberg robbed him of the apex. The difference this time from previous attempts was that the German was able to take the lead at the exit of the corner. The German driver had pushed hard since the beginning of the race in his quest to take first place, and finally he had reached his goal. But sadly for him, it only lasted for a brief period of time. By braking so late and letting Hamilton take the usual racing line, Rosberg had put himself in a vulnerable spot for the corners that followed. Now, both Mercedes drivers would find themselves on the straight, en route to turn 4. Rosberg is now forced to block Hamilton, who was faster due to the slipstream. This would be his only chance of maintaining the lead. Because Hamilton's benefit from the tow, he could find himself on the inside at the next corner. Rosberg had to be ready. Rosberg then placed himself at the extreme left of the track, giving him the desired apex at the corner. However, as luck would have it, Hamilton was faster and the Brit decided to take the outside exactly like Rosberg had done in the first lap. That allowed the German to keep the lead at the corner, including coming out of it. But then, momentum of rejoicing for Rosberg is short-lived. It would take much more than that to defeat Hamilton. With the decision of letting Rosberg keep the lead at the previous corner, Hamilton gave himself the better exit when coming out of turn 4. That way, he could place his car right beside his teammates going into the S's that are corners 5, 6, and 7. And then Hamilton, who was slightly faster and in a better position, placed his vehicle in the middle of the S's. He then takes back the lead, this being done precisely at turn 6. That sequence of racing was magnificent. Seeing Hamilton and Rosberg battling wheels to wheels like that was something for the ages. Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff had promised no interference before the race. It was a promise he delivered on in spades. The crowd and the television viewers are thrilled that Mercedes decided to let their drivers fight it out. If the team was going to dominate the season, as was becoming apparent, it would be a massive benefit for the sport if contests were not decided before the start of the races. For now, the advantage was on the side of Hamilton, as both he and Rosberg completed the lap together, and at the end, Hamilton, still the leader at that time, would go to the pit. His stop would take a mere 2.7 seconds to complete. At the end of the 21st lap, it was Rosberg's time to enter pit row. At that point, he put the medium compound tires on, with Hamilton now driving laps on soft tires. The German driver's stop costing him 2.9 total seconds. Rosberg then re-entered the duel in second place as Hamilton overtook him easily while the German was still in pit lane. Rosberg had now lost important time on Hamilton. The undercut serves the British driver well. At that point, the team warns Rosberg that it will be a long stint for the driver on the newly mounted medium tires. For Rosberg, the race was now a waiting game. What he has to do is not let Hamilton take off and place himself in a position to benefit from the soft tires when, at the end, he will have them. His job was now to prepare an insurmountable challenge to Hamilton during the last 10 laps of the race. On lap 23, Hamilton found himself leading by 6 seconds on Rosberg. While the Williams and Force India drivers battled between themselves for third place, the race followed the script prepared by Mercedes. Rosberg, disadvantaged by his tire compound and in a longer pit stint than Hamilton, lost even more time. On lap 26, the gap had now reached 6.6 seconds between the two competitors, and that time distance would continue to grow in the coming laps, eventually reaching 10 seconds by lap 37. However, things could be worse for Rosberg. The medium tires he was running on were, according to Mercedes executive director Paddy Lowe, only slowing the driver by somewhere between 3 to 5/10 of a second in comparison to the soft tires that Hamilton was using. Rosberg was pushing hard during these long laps, and he was able to cut his losses to around 0.2 of a second on each lap. But with a 10-second lead, the mountain to climb was enormous. In his helmet, Hamilton was simply hoping that this would be significant enough to reduce the number of laps Rosberg would have at the end of the race to fight him. That was possible only if the German would be able to reduce the gap between the two and thus contend for the win. Then, with 16 laps to go, Pastor Maldonado's Lotus heads out of the pits and collides directly with an unsuspecting Esteban Gutierrez at turn 1. The Argentinian Sauber then flips over many times, but luckily for his sake, Gutierrez was uninjured. But the car left a ton of debris on the track, and that called for a couple of laps behind the safety car. With this situation playing out, the lead that Hamilton had built on Rosberg evaporated, gone, just like that. The two Mercedes drivers would stop together. At this point, Hamilton put his medium tires on the car and Rosberg placed the soft tires on. The dynamics have now changed, and Rosberg now had the advantage, with the German's tires being around a second per lap faster than those of Hamilton. But Hamilton had something going for him. Now, Rosberg would need to burn the fuel that he had saved along the way. Hamilton did not have this problem, and his car was a little lighter than his teammates. Behind them, the two Force India cars of Sergio Perez and Nico Hülkenberg, plus the McLaren of Jenson Button, find themselves in 3rd, 4th, and 5th place respectively. All were on medium tires. In theory, they could threaten the silver cars. In reality, nobody thought that was a possibility. The Mercedes were a couple of levels above the opposition at the outset of the 2014 season. In the Mercedes stands, all sensed that it would be an unforgivable battle for the duration of the last 10 laps. Paddy Lowe declared, "In terms of entertainment, you could not have set it up better. The safety car created the situation with the two cars that normally would have had a big gap suddenly closed up, and the car behind was on the quicker option. Executive Director Lowe then radioed both Hamilton and Rosberg, saying that with only 10 laps left the race, he wanted a simple assurance that the racers would make sure to bring both cars home. In other words, you can fight amongst yourselves, but your number one priority is to not ram into each other. Rosberg would challenge Hamilton for the lead. On lap 47, the safety car entered the pits and the drivers were once again able to race. This time, Rosberg had the best start of the two Mercedes drivers. Hamilton responded by going slightly off the racing line to his left, with the hope of blocking his teammate at the first corner. But at that moment, Rosberg tried to go to the outside of the apex. Hamilton had other plans and was already there and blocked him again. This was only the beginning of things that would transpire between the two. Their duel was not the only battle going on. Numerous clashes amongst other drivers were happening at the same time. Behind the Mercedes, the two Force India drivers were involved in their own battle, and was even more disputed. Hülkenberg was blocked by Perez at the inside, so he headed to the outside, which Perez then blocks by taking as much track as he possibly could muster in the corner. Perez prevailed. Back in front, the two leaders battling again heading into turn 4, when Rosberg, going for the outside, became a repeat of lap 1, with Hamilton completely blocking Rosberg's way. Rosberg was forced to lift his accelerator foot and let the Brit keep first place, but that would not diminish the Germans' determination. In their fierce battle, both Mercedes distanced themselves from their competition as they had done earlier in the race, but they remained in very close proximity to one another. With Rosberg staying just behind Hamilton for the entirety of the lap, we sensed that he would go at it again with turn 1 on lap 48. Rosberg gave a look, but immediately understood that he did not have much of a chance at success. On lap 49, the DRS was enabled again. Rosberg now found himself inside the second from which he needed to benefit. Hamilton was really under threat at this moment. If Rosberg wanted to overtake his teammate, now was the time to make it a reality. At the outset of lap 50 of the race's 57 total laps, Rosberg had the DRS going into turn 1, but was unable to catch Hamilton before the apex. Once again, he had to play safe and wait for the perfect time to strike. At the same time, Perez, now in third place, was already 6 seconds behind Hamilton. It is there that the F1 universe understood the magnitude of the superiority of the newer version of the Silver Arrow. Rosberg had realized the fastest lap of the race on lap 49, with a time of 1 minute 37 2/2 of a second. It was a full 2 seconds faster than any car other than a Mercedes. With that lap, Rosberg was still inside the second necessary, meaning Hamilton could not rest. While Rosberg continued to pressure Hamilton, a battle between the two Red Bull drivers foreshadowed what the rest of the season would be like for them. Daniel Ricciardo, a newcomer inside the team, was able to challenge and overtake his teammate and 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel into turn 1. Vettel tried to take back 5th place in turn 4, but Ricciardo resisted. At the time, Ricciardo was already better than Vettel since the start of the season, and with that maneuver, he continued to send strong messages to his team and for all the F1 universe about his value as a driver. But Red Bull had difficulties to keep up with the pace set by Mercedes, and few made much of the significance of the overtaking that day by the Australian. Still, Vettel being beaten by Ricciardo would happen more and more often as the season dragged on for Red Bull. What's more, Ricciardo was gaining on the Force India drivers, and with the pace he was on, he would soon catch them. Back to the front of the race, Rosberg was still a half second behind Hamilton by lap 52. He knows the time was running out, and he needed to try something if he wanted to win. Again, Rosberg attempted to surprise Hamilton by braking at turn 1, but he came from a little bit too far back for it to be decisive. He would also be cautious as he left enough space between the two, allowing Hamilton to turn with ease. Hamilton kept his line, knowing that the following corner would be favorable to him. But now, as they headed towards turn 4, Rosberg remained closely by Hamilton. That meant that the German driver was faster and could overtake Hamilton even before they reached the turn. And Hamilton was aware, so once again, he covered the inside and Rosberg had to settle for the outside. It's the third time the German tried the maneuver since the beginning of the race, and the result looked to be the same every time. Hamilton took as much track as he possibly could going out of the corner again. Rosberg looked to be trapped. But this time, Rosberg was having none of it. He insisted and persisted. Now both Mercedes drivers were locked in side by side coming out of the corner. That put Rosberg in a difficult position as he would have to put his wheels outside of the track, which he does. With all of his skills, Rosberg was able to keep control of his machine, insisting that it could help him as he drove into the S's of turns 5, 6, and 7. But no, Hamilton remained the fastest and came out of the corners still in first place. At the time, all the people in the garage, in the stands, and in front of their televisions knew that they were witnessing a rare display of talents and determination from both drivers. It was an incredible fight between the two professionals, a sure thing of beauty. While they risked everything in their fierce battle, the two drivers remained mightily impressive. In this magnitude of racing, it could have been so easy to have an accident with each passing attempt, but their battle was as clean as it could be. Still in second, Rosberg was determined now more than ever, and he stayed very close to Hamilton. And Hamilton was impressive too. Don't forget that he had a clear disadvantage being on the medium compound tires. Rosberg benefited from the DRS going into turn 11. He gave a look, but decided to wait. The two cars completed the 52nd lap with Rosberg still following closely behind Hamilton. Now both drivers were going into the straight to begin lap 53, with the possibility of Rosberg with the DRS being fast enough to try again at the first corner. At this point, Hamilton, who had rebuked him already numerous times, thought maybe this attempt would be the one where Rosberg might take first place for good. Rosberg arrived at the corner at a tremendous pace, too quick in fact, as he hit his brakes extremely late. Hamilton attempted to block him, but he needed to change his mind when he realized that Rosberg was well on his way to hitting the back of his car. He then decided to simply take his corner as he normally would. This as Rosberg had left him the inside of the corner by braking late. The German's attempt was overly ambitious. The fact that Rosberg was way too fast at the braking zone of turn 1 cost him, as he was unable to try something going into turn 4, as he had previously done on other occasions. Hamilton was now clearly ahead in the corner. Still, the German had not lost hope, but he needed to take an entire lap to recover from his failed attempts. The rhythm imposed by the two Mercedes was tremendous as they battled one another. They were flat out at all times during the Bahrain race. Behind them, Perez was now 14 seconds back. It was like an abyss between Mercedes and the others. On lap 54, Hamilton found a way to increase the gap significantly enough to prevent Rosberg from once again trying to pass him at turn 1. Rosberg had lost a slight amount of rhythm necessary to challenge the leader when he missed his attempts during the previous lap. It's approximately at this moment when Mercedes radioed Hamilton to tell him that he could use the boost outside of the corner when necessary. That could help him out a ton until the end of the competition. Behind, Ricciardo had overtaken Hülkenberg to take 4th place. The Australian continued to impress after having started from the 13th place on the grid due to a penalty. On lap 55, Hamilton now had the second advantage that he needed on Rosberg. If he maintained that single second, the German driver would be unable to use the DRS on him. This could be a game changer for the final laps of the race. Things don't move during lap 56, and thus begins lap 57, the last lap of the race, and Rosberg continuing to stick very close to Hamilton, but with the gap around 1 second, he's just too far back. Plus, he appears quieter than he had been before. Maybe he had attempted all the moves he could muster and Hamilton was simply able to resist. The last lap would be a telltale sign. When they crossed the detection point for the DRS, Hamilton had the smallest of leads that allowed him to escape being attacked one last time by Rosberg. The German stayed close right up into the end, but it would prove futile, as he was unable to attack Hamilton once more. After having pushed like a madman to keep the lead and resist so many devastating attacks from Rosberg, Hamilton crossed the finish line just ahead of his teammate. This would be Hamilton's second race victory of the season. And what a beautiful win it was for Hamilton. Despite being beaten in the qualifying session, he was the better driver from the start to the end of the race. It is maybe there that he really wins the race, as he was able to impose his rhythm on Rosberg for the entirety of the event. There's no doubt that the German had challenged Hamilton hard. But at every turn, Hamilton was able to be the best of the two. He had resisted like few were ever able to do at this level. It was a massive performance by Hamilton. Later, Hamilton would state that, "It felt like one of the best calculated races I've ever had. How I was using my power and how I was positioning my car. He'd catch me down the back straight, still be with me at the last corner, and have 10 to 12 kilometers per hour on me with the DRS. So I had to accept he was going to come past. I couldn't come to the inside and then block. I had to get him back. I don't know how I did it all the time." For his part, Rosberg had nothing to be ashamed of. He can recall the start and the way he had been beaten right from the get-go by Hamilton. If he had been in the lead at the outset of the race, the Grand Prix could have been different for him. Hamilton was simply better than he was on this day, at this particular moment in time. After that, Rosberg tried everything he could to retake first place in the battle, but it was too difficult a feat to beat a driver at Hamilton's level driving in an identical car. Rosberg's attempts were spectacular, but Hamilton's method of resistance under pressure was even better. Hamilton had the best drive of the two and deserved the victory. The 2014 Bahrain Grand Prix gave us a picture of what was to come between both Mercedes drivers. Now that we are years later, looking back, the battle between Hamilton and Rosberg at Bahrain in 2014 was the best of them all. Behind them, Perez was able to contain the onslaught of attacks by Ricciardo, good enough for third place for Force India. Still, he found himself 24 seconds off the lead. It was clear at this point in the season that this would be a Mercedes season, and it would remain as such for a long stretch of time. Hamilton and Rosberg greeted each other as they exited their respective cars. They knew that their battle had been epic. They fought hard, but they were able to both bring their cars home safely. This was a testament to their skill set. In the cooling room, there were hugs and pats in the back between the two drivers, the two teammates. It was their way of saying, "Great fight. We had a lot of fun out there." Unfortunately, the amicable sentiment would not last. By the end of the season, their relationship would be filled with anger and become increasingly more complicated. But for now, Hamilton and Rosberg were still thrilled after their Bahrain battle, with Hamilton saying, "It was fantastic," and Rosberg declaring, "Today was a day for the sport." They would have many more battles during their time together, but none was more exciting than the one they had in Bahrain in 2014. For this race, the author was assisted through the following sources: watching the race on the F1 TV app, the race report by Motorsport Magazine reporter Mark Hughes, and the race report by Autosport journalist Ed Straw. For executive producer Simon Bachand, I'm Jeremy Zaffron.